Welcome to your
The White Republic, Race, Religion, and American Nationalism.
Welcome back to Your Liberation Library with your host, Carl McRoy. And today we have a very special guest. He is the author of this book, I Am Amazed. He is the Reverend Dr. Gerald R. Durley, and he has a nickname that he drops several times in the book, and he has a number of titles, a number of different areas that he has served in. And so I just want to allow you to introduce yourself, including your nickname, Double D, and you let us know what that stands for. But in seriously sharing with us, the different roles that you have played throughout the years.
First of all, let me thank you so much for allowing me to come with your distinguished audience and just share some of the ideas that we've gone through over the years and what we've put in the book, but more importantly, how does it impact one's life? As you said, you have a lot of titles in life. They can call you Mr., they can call you Reverend, they can call you Bishop, they can call you Potentate. But the nickname that they gave me, because I played basketball in my home, was Denver. They called me the Double D. The Double D, that was my nickname all the way through school, the Double D. And that's it for the Double D was the dangerous, delectable, darling, dynamic, devastating, delectable D from Denver. And that was the Double D. So whenever they said, oh, here comes the dangerous, delectable, devastating D from Denver. And that was the kind of nickname that they always had given me. I don't know how dangerous I am, nor devastating.
but you've had the opportunity, I learned in this book, you didn't just play ball in Denver, but you played ball in some unexpected places, right?
Right. Basketball was I guess, kind of an opening for me, because having grown up on the West Coast and there in California, and then of course Colorado, just playing basketball. And in 1960, there were the Olympic trials, and there were two young athletes, one named Wilma Rudolph, one named Ralph Boston, who went to Tennessee State. And they had the basketball trials in Denver, Colorado. That was 1960. And we won the championship, and a man by the name of Johnny McClendon said, we'd like to recruit you to come to Nashville, to Tennessee State. I thought, what is this, Tennessee State? I was not going to go south in 1960, not all the things that I'd heard. So I said, I'll go to the University of California, University of Colorado, some of the larger majority institutions. But I was blessed to go down there that summer. And there was a young man there that came from Indianapolis. His name, he came, but he didn't stay. He said we were working too hard. He left and went to Cincinnati. His name was Oscar Robinson, but he couldn't take the punishment that we were taking in 1960. But I stayed on there, and I think it was one of the turning points in my life, going to Tennessee State University from Colorado.
And then somehow you ended up playing basketball overseas.
Yeah, well, that was some years later. What had happened there, I'd gotten intentionally involved in the civil rights movement all through the 60s, became leader of the students in 1963, led all the students to the march in Washington. We were out there, the March on Washington. And when we came back, September of 1963, getting the students together, getting ready to try to voter registration, get out to vote. I was so excited. I was very excited. But only a few months later, after coming back from the March on Washington, John F. Kennedy was murdered. And when Kennedy was murdered, it kind of put a damper on much of the things that we were talking about and doing. And so I just kind of pulled away from everything. But that about 3 months after his death, two men came to my dormitory room and wanted to speak to the students. One of them was white and one of them was Black. And I'm talking about circumstances that happen in your life that you don't know what you're doing, where you're going. But if you're fairly open, things can happen. And the white man said, I would like for you to join a program that my brother-in-law had started. In those days, we didn't join anything that white folks said that they wanted us to join. And I just said no. But the Black man who was there with him said, you need to listen to him. Now, my attitude in those days, why would a Black man come to a Black campus, coming to the student government president, trying to get me to get in this program. So he said, let me ask you 3 questions. And this man said, who do you know that's important? I mean, the governor, senators. I said, well, I don't know. He's okay. How much money do you have? I said, about $49, $50. Where have you been outside of the United States? So I thought I had him. I said, I'd been to Hawaii. He said, I said, outside of the United States. So here was this black man seemingly insulting me in front of this white man. Then he said, no, I'm not insulting you. I just want you to give him a chance to speak. He said, you only have 40, you don't have any money, you've never been anywhere, and you don't know anybody. That man's name was Samuel DeWitt Proctor. He was assistant director to a man named Sergeant Shriver, and Sergeant Shriver's brother-in-law was John F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy had just started the Peace Corps. And therein, the change to go into Africa for 2 years, and when I left Africa, I couldn't get back in the United States, so I ended up in Switzerland. That's how I ended up there on the All-European basketball team. But it started from the synergism of questioning back and forth and where you are in your own personal development. So it was not a plan.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's one of the things about your book that, you know, like you say over and over again, I'm amazed at this, I'm amazed at that. You know, you're amazed at how different things happened in your life, and it led you to a point. I just want to jump around a little bit here, if that's all right. Led you to a point that, and we're going to skip some of the stories because, listen, the audience needs to read the book, because there are episodes in here that are suitable for a Tyler Perry movie. I mean, there's some comical stuff, there's some drama, but you end up in front of a certain institution, and that's where you get your call to ministry, but you don't realize it yet. Tell us where you ended up in front of, and who it was that appeared like an angel to you.
I'm trying to, that day. Because one of the things I think in all of our lives, we can talk about planning, we can talk about reading books about planning and all the way through, but a lot of times things happen in our lives that are simply amazing, but we never recognize it. Every person who's listening to me right now, your life is amazing, but you've never taken time to say, that's amazing. I never thought about it. We just go from one thing to the next. So my son was being born at a hospital, Cape's Hospital there in Washington, D.C. at that time. And he was born with jaundice, and they thought that he had died. And I was downstairs with my daughter, had her head in my lap. I'm talking about things that just come into your life that you are unexpectedly. That's why I like to believe, expect the unexpected and you'll be all right. And so I was sitting there, and the nurse came down, and I thought my son had been up there. He had been jaundiced. He was in a kind of a comatose state when they took him up with my wife. And the lady came down and said, and I said, God, if you just help me through tonight. My son is only 4 or 5 months old. If he dies or if he lives, can I use all the kinds of things that I've done, my civil rights days, my travel, my jail time? I'll use it to bless your kingdom and do what I can. And a lot of times you bargain with God to try to get your way, but you really say, well, I can slip back once I get what I've gotten. So the lady came downstairs and she said, she was looking for somebody. And she said, is Mr. Brown here? And she was looking around with Mr. Brown, and I said, no, my name is Durley. She said, oh, I'm sorry, I meant Durley. I said, well, I'm Mr. Durley. She said, well, I just wanted to tell you that your son passed about 2 hours ago. And I sit there with my daughter in my lap, and there comes a time in all of our lives when we must put in what we talked about, what we thought about. And I had reconciled myself to believing that my son had passed. And so I said, well, what do I do? What do I mean serve God? What do I mean get out and do things like this? And I said, I'm going to do it. And I was kind of nodding. She came back downstairs. She said, oh, excuse me. I made a mistake. I meant to tell you he will be all right. And I was confused. And when truth hits you, you're somewhere between, is it real or is it not real? Is it God? Are you playing games with me? I don't know. So I stood there and I said, oh, man. They said, no, he's going to be all right. We're going to keep you here. It's going. I was so excited. I went out and bought me a pint of Jack Daniels. and it was snowing heavy in DC, and I started drinking the Jack. My head got a little twisted, and I said, man, I was about 20, maybe 28, 29 years old then. And so I ended up said, well, I'm gonna thank God. So I said, I'm gonna drive up to Howard University and thank God. And it was snowing that night, heavy snowing. And I parked my car, and the snow covered my car, and I went up to Rankin Chapel, which was not where they were meeting. The school was somewhere else. But I tried to get into Rankin Chapel, so the police guards arrested me. They didn't arrest me. They handcuffed me and took me into the security office. And I'm sitting there in the security office waiting for the police to pick me up. But it was so much snow they didn't come. So the next day, I go out to find my car, couldn't find it. Finally, I found it and drove over to the School of Divinity and got caught in a snowbank. I'm sitting there in a snowbank, it's cold and everything. And this man face came up on the window. You all right in there? You all right? I said, oh. And when I looked, I said, this must be a real light-skinned guy with kind of white hair. This must be an angel speaking to me. My car is gone. My baby, they said he's alive. He's not alive. And that man's name was Dean Jones, Lawrence Jones, the dean of the School of Howard University. He said, look, you're cold. Why don't you come inside? And whoo, what's that smell on you? I said, well, it was a rough night, Dean. My son is alive. Went in, and the rest is history. I went on and enrolled at Howard School of Divinity. And years later, I had the opportunity to do his eulogy. But that was a turning point. And I think, and that's amazing. You never think about it. You look back, all of that, a 24-hour period where you're sitting in a security place at Howard, then getting in to go thank God at the School of Divinity, get caught in a snowbank. A guy comes in and you wonder, is this the Miracle on 23rd Street or one of those Christmas movies? That's amazing.
Right.
But we never think about those amazing moments.
Right. And he planted a statement that you revisited a few times throughout the rest of the book, that when you're ready to see how God can work through people, then come back and see me, right? It was something like that.
Yeah. When you're ready to come. What happens, I think, when you go through those amazing moments, you don't think they're amazing. You just think, well, something happened, happens chance. And so you don't pay any attention to it. And so you kind of, pass it off and all this. But then you come back. And I think the dean said, look here, when you're ready to get serious, you come and see me. I said, I'm serious right now, because I can always kind of talk my way through things. I'm serious now. He said, you're not serious yet. When you're ready to talk to me, come back. And several other things happened that were amazing. And I found myself say, Dean, and I said, I'm broke. I have a little small baby and a little 2-year-old girl. I love my wife. I'm not working now, and all of this. And he found money, a scholarship, $2,500. And that $2,500 is allowing me to speak to you today. That's amazing.
Yeah. So now it's amazing. Now you had already served in some pretty large responsibilities, and you already had 2 or 3 degrees, didn't you?
Well, yeah, I had all during the civil rights movement. I was going in and out of jail, but I finished with a 3.7 in psychology from Tennessee State. My master's in psychology is from Illinois, and my doctorate degree is from University of Massachusetts in psychology. So I already had 3 degrees in psychology, and then came back and then got another.
Went to divinity school.
And by training, I'm a licensed psychologist and all of that. But then I went back and about 35 or so, and then got the Master of Divinity. Yeah. And then I came on to Atlanta to be with Elias Blake, and the rest is kind of history, the dean at these schools. And then some kind of way, I got tricked into the ministry.
Yes. And, now, before you get to the tricked into ministry, let's go to, if we can, and then I want you to name drop some more, because I think it's important for some of us. I mean, if I wouldn't have gone to a little meeting in Atlanta called Concerned Black Clergy, I never would have known of you, never would have got to know you, or even known of you, perhaps. And so we want to get to some of the different activities that you've been involved in through the years, and some of the people that you've been in contact with. But before that, your discussion about calling versus being called versus being compelled, and how you felt a little bit out of place for a little while when you were in school there.
When you talk about, you figure like this, when I got to Tennessee State, there was another young man, he and I used to talk. He was 20, I was 18. And an old man used to try to talk to us. He was 34 years old. We wondered, what can an old man tell us? But we were respectful. The old man's name was C.T. Vivian. The guy who was 20 was John Lewis. I was 18. John was 20. And we'd be there in Nashville. And you hear all these stories, but we were very much concerned about civil rights and human rights and voting rights. And the preachers, we didn't care too much, but we understood that it had to have a spiritual and ethical foundation with Martin and this other young guy, 28 years old. I was 18, Andy was 20. He's 99, I'm 80. So consequently, all of those, we were all in that.
Hold on. You just said Andy. I want to make sure everybody knows what Andy you're talking about.
Oh, Andrew Young. Yeah. And
yes.
In fact, Andrew was 28. John Lewis was 20. I was 18. CT was 34. Lawson was down at Fisk. But again, remember this, I was not encouraged to get involved with that because it was not fashionable for students to go down there and challenge, the political structure in Nashville. And particularly in my case, because I was on a basketball scholarship, and the coach would tell you all, do not go down there and get in trouble. We brought you here to play basketball and to get an education. But there were students all over that said there is something greater than just basketball and an education. And I think the success of the civil rights movement is something that we need to apply today. There were two words that fueled what kept us going: sacrifice and risk. Everyone needs to ask the question when they're making a major decision to make to move in a direction. What am I willing to sacrifice and what am I willing to risk? And when you're willing to sacrifice and risk, then you can move ahead in the direction and your called purpose. And once your purpose is straight, then God can give you the power to do what it is that you have to do. So John Lewis and Andy and we were there at that time. Then, of course, that set me up for the 1963. And then after that meeting, Sam Proctor and just a plethora of other people through the movement now. And I think all of those, that's why I say it's amazing, because you don't think about it. And like you said, you came to a Concerned Black Clergy. What I've found over the years, people that are trying to do something, that are really committed and really concerned, you don't see a neon sign over their head. They're just about doing it. You don't see them in the papers every day. Martin was never one, the press pulled him in, but he was always one to try to step back and stay out unless forced to do something like that. And I find that that's true today. A lot of the good work that's being done today, you won't even know who's doing it, but they're behind the scenes pulling the switches and making things happen. Now you got a few pseudo vocal individuals who are out there talking all of the time, but they're not making the major change. They're getting the publicity, but a lot of the change I found over the years are those that have just stand true to the cause, true to the purpose, true to the mission, and understanding the vision of uplifting all of God's people, and particularly in the African-American community. So you meet people along the way, like Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier, all of these people that came down, and Bennett, but we just saw them as people who were concerned about the movement. You didn't see, well, Jesse and I were the same age coming through there. And Jesse was, had gone to Illinois, then he got there and he was up on the balcony. But we didn't see Jesse as some icon or anything like that. Or even right now, Jamil Rap Brown, he was over on the Eastern Shore at that time. He had his mission, he had his moment, but we didn't see him as any of those kinds of individuals that were doing that as some iconic individual. They just did what they felt that they had to do to champion their cause. And I think that along the way, you don't see them as looming dignitaries. Now, I look at CT and Andy and particularly John and others, because they've stood the test of time.
Right.
I look at Jesse now. We were all together at Andy's 90th birthday party, Andrew Young birthday party the other day. And I was talking, and Jesse's gone through a lot, and people are saying, look at him now. Look at, is that Parkinson's, all that? Where would you have been had you been in the front for 40 or 50 or 60 years every day from all sides? As I say now, Roy, one of the things that's so important, I tell people, don't ever sing to me about being on the battlefield. We get up and sing, I'm on the battlefield. We jump, we shout, our wigs fall off, our teeth fall out singing, I'm on the battlefield. But there's a lot of people that are on the battlefield, but they've never been in the battle. See, you can be on the battlefield and not be in the battle. When you're in the battle, you're going to get some scars. You're going to get some hurt. You're going to get some pain. And the way to make it through that, I found out Joe Lowry lived to be 97. Great sense of humor. C.T. Vivian had a sense of humor. And he's got a sense of humor. There's some things you've got to find that will hold you steady, that you say, that is just downright funny. And Martin King had a great sense of humor. And that's not silly and that's not foolishness, but you look and you put it in perspective and say, God, I can't handle it. You got to take it here. And everybody laughs and it releases certain enzymes, and I think in the body so that you can go back into the battle, not being on the battlefield. I've got friends that's been on the battlefield and doesn't have a scar on them. But when you've been in the battle, then you are amazed that you came through it.
Now, you mentioned the difference between being called and being compelled at one point in your book.
Well, the call, a lot of times in the old days, if you were going into the ministry and the older people wanted to make sure that the Lord had touched you, and you had to have a calling story. How were you called? Who called you? Where were you when you were called? And you want to get either into the school or the job at the church. So you had to have a calling story. And most of the stories were really, to me, I couldn't disagree with them, but they were kind of funny. I was on my knees shooting craps and I had a bottle of Boone's Farm in my hand. And I threw my hand up and something grabbed my hand. And it was the calling of the Lord on my life. And the Lord called me. And so they asked me for my calling story. How were you called? I said, well, I wasn't called by AT&T or Sprint, but I am compelled to speak out against injustice. I am compelled to speak truth to power. I am compelled, and the force that's guiding me is a spiritual deity that's greater than me. So I'm compelled, but I didn't have a thundering voice or something grab my hand or throw me on the ground and I went into convulsion. So if I don't qualify, then I can't be there. So I was compelled, and it's that same compelling force that drives me even now. Compelled to go to the hospital, compelled to do this hugely, compelled to talk to a young 14-year-old girl who's pregnant, compelled to hold those that are trying to answer the question, am I gay, am I lesbian? Do I come out of the closet or do I stay in the closet? Compelled to be that listening voice. And when you're compelled to do something, I think there's a force inside of you. That just amazes me when you're compelled like that. But a lot of they have a calling story, and I'm convinced now, as I look over the years, I listen to some of the calling stories, and I'm convinced now that they were called by AT&T, Sprint, Mobile Dex. I don't know who they were called for, but when you got a compelling force in your life, and I think that that's what I meant about compelling, not putting down those that had that force. Maybe they did. I did not go through a calling. I went through a compelling.
I like that. And I think that can touch so many people that are listening to you right now, not having the dramatic type of thing that you're talking about, the stories that others have told. They've had rather ordinary lives, but they were compelled to do something. And that's what you're saying throughout your book is even those ordinary moments where it's not extraordinary, it's not something that's going to draw the spotlight to you, but pay attention to these ordinary moments that you feel compelled to do this thing or that, and that very well may be God's purpose at work in your life. And so I love that. I think a lot of people are able to connect with that. I think where we need to head now is because, again, there's so much in here that people need to read your story. They really do. I mean, that's all we have right now till somebody makes it into a movie. Hopefully,
yeah, right.
we could get Spike Lee or Tyler Perry or somebody to have some fun with that because there's lots of material in there. But what do you have going on now? Because you're retired, but you're not tired. I mean, anytime I try to reach you, you're kind enough to take my call or return my call, but you're always in the middle of something. What's the main thing going on?
Well, I think, remember this, everything starts with a thought. Before you just articulated what you said, you were thinking about it. Before I say something, it starts with a thought, because our thoughts become our words. And then our words become our behavior, and our behavior become our habits, and our habits become our destiny. So it starts with a thought. So when I say the word retirement, what is that? Retirement, right away, something jumped in your mind, whether it's on the golf course or swimming or just sitting back. A lot of people say, I'm retiring to spend more time with my family. Well, you see, I didn't retire. Let me give you the word I use. I'm in rewirement. I am rewired. Rewired means that your lines have gotten crushed in it, but you can rewire and take that information that you've learned, and through rewirement, you just don't quit. I look at those that are still in the battle. They had not only the great sense of humor, but Andrew Young is everywhere. In fact, this week he's addressing a group of young people from Wales, and CT and Bernard Lafayette. They're rewired. But once you say retired, then you say, oh, where are you retiring? Where you're going to travel some more? You're going to do this? No, I think that God can use you, and that's amazing. And it keeps you alive. It keeps you vibrant. When I rewired, I was just tired of deacon board meetings and trustee meetings and going there, everything. But I love sharing of marriage counseling and things like that. What is the thing that God has gotten you to do? What kind of sponge are you so that when somebody touches you, the nice fluid can come out and enhance their way of living? So right now, once you've been in pastoring or counseling or banking, you're full of something. And now in the rewirement, allow somebody to touch that and just share it, let it out. And I think that's what I see now. As I said in the book, I'm going into the period called just being alive. Yes. It's an acronym. And it just hit me while I was writing it. I mean, sometimes you give an acronym, then you have to make words to fit the acronym rather than the acronym to fit the word. And it meant, and I think about this, a life is valuable every day. Alive. So if you're to be alive, a life is valuable every day. An acronym. And so now, all that we're going through, all that I'm looking at with Black Lives Matter and the marches in the street, then how do you become a person that can, in some way, engender a spark that will give a new life? So many of our young people are walking around like zombies. They're walking around like zombies, and not because of any deliberate something, but because there are very few stimulants that give them the stimulation that says, wait a minute, I've got to do this because this is really important. And if we can be that kind of stimulator for our young people to say, this is what I want to do. I tell young people all this time, if you want to be a bum, I mean a real bum, get up early in the morning and start bumming. Don't start bumming at half day. Whatever you're going to do, give your all, give it all out. If you're going to be a drunk, don't sit up and talk about a teetotal. Drink all you can drink, but be the best. If you're going to fight in the cause, if you're going to stand up for the principle of speaking truth to power, then go all the way, willing to sacrifice, and you'll be surprised how you'll be blessed and stimulated, and the words will come to you, the thoughts will come to you, because you'll have something that I call transparency in your life. People can pick up on a phony quick. They can pick up. And so you don't want, and when you realize you don't have to put on all of the pretenses and allow God to use you in a very special way, then God will speak through you, because then you become that oracle or that vehicle. Not that you're looking for it, but it happens because there's a certain sense of honesty and transparency. So I think in rewirement, you have the luxury of saying, oh, yeah. And that's
like that. Rewirement. We need to make that into a hashtag.
Rewirement. Yeah.
Rewirement. Listen, okay, so I know you're still civically engaged. You're still involved in some causes, and what are some of the top things that you are involved in now?
One of the things that I'm very much concerned about, as all of us are looking at now, and about 9 or 10 years ago, I never thought that I would be talking about. I'm one of the few pastors or people of color who's really concerned about climate change and global warming and how it negatively, disproportionately impacts communities of color. We've got other priorities in our lives: police brutality, employment, inaccessibility to healthcare, all kinds of things, rather than looking at trees and looking at weather and looking at polar bears trying to make it to the next. And so, again, going back to Robert, we were talking about things happen in your life when you open up. I had no idea that for 10 years I'd be really concerned about global warming and CO2 in the air and trying to get it down to 1.5 Celsius, and now challenging the major oil and gas companies. But if we really look at it, down there in Louisiana, there's an 85-mile strip where cancer is high as it's ever been because of petroleum companies that are polluting the water and the air. And most of these toxic waste dumps are in in our neighborhoods and in poor rural areas. So I compare that now with the civil rights movement. It was our constitutional right to vote, to ride in where we wanted to in the transportation across the state line. That was a constitutional right, but we denied it. So we had to get in and fight. It's a constitutional right for your child and my child and grandchildren to have clean water, clean air, oceans where the seafood is not being destroyed and plastics are not choking out the sea life. That's a constitutional right. So for the last X number of years, I've been comparing and contrasting the civil rights movement, what we were willing to do, what we were willing to organize, what we were willing to strategize, but then mobilize to bring that. Now, to go into the Black community, that's kind of tough because you're a minority, kind of like John the Baptist out in the wilderness speaking, because they said, man, you're talking about trees and bees dying and wildfires and all of this. And then I had to break it down. The pandemic just got everybody. The pandemic doesn't care whether you're white or Black or rich or poor or gay or straight or tall or short. It hits us all the same way. So it hit us all the same with the climate. A wildfire doesn't say, I think I'll burn up the Black neighborhood, or I'll burn up the white neighborhood, or I think I'll put a drought over here or a drought over there. It is an equal opportunity destroyer. So I came up with a word the other day. The pandemic is tough, but the climademic, when you get into the climademic, because there are no vaccines against climate, what we're doing. There are no special social distancing or masks. It's all the same because we are violating Genesis 1:26, where God said, I'm loaning you a planet, take care of that planet. And we've taken it and treated it like a used car. We've done everything. We've polluted it, and now it's destroying us, and it's profits over people. So therefore, the voices of God now must speak up against the atrociousness of this. Now, we suffer most because of the toxic waste dump. So then the call of God must speak to that and challenge these companies. So now this is the last part. This phase of my rewirement is to now continue to do that. But guess what? Now, look at it, it's picking up steam. 10 years ago, it wasn't. The question then becomes, how does a person who was in the civil rights movement, dean of universities and all this, and getting ready to step out, how does he get into it? If you remember, I started with Sergeant Shriver and Proctor coming into my dorm.
Right.
A lady came to town, a white lady. She had a little money. I didn't know that. I knew something about her, but she was going to come to town to work with young African-American girls on teenage pregnancy. She said, I want to curb pregnancy. But many of the white evangelicals were saying, she doesn't need to come here. She's using her voice and her name and her celebrity to just try to, I don't know what she's trying to do. She's trying to now pass abortion in the Black community. So somebody said, well, why don't you take Durley to a meeting with you? So I went to a meeting with this lady out at Hartsfield Jackson Airport, and there were 60 pastors, all white, who were condemning this lady because she was now articulating abortion. She said, no, I'm talking about life change and taking responsibility. And I set up, and so I was standing by the door saying nothing. And one of the men there said, who are you? Are you her bodyguard? Now, why would I? Because I'm 6'4.5". Why would I be her bodyguard? So I simply said, do I look like a bodyguard? Well, you're standing there guarding her. I said, no, I just rode up here. I didn't know any of it. And they kind of laughed. And they said, well, are you going to say anything or just stand there? The privileged mentality to make that, then all of a sudden I floated back to 1960. So I simply said to him, I could say something if I wanted to. He said, but in order to speak here, ha, 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 you need a PowerPoint. Do you know what a PowerPoint is? I said, well, so she said, no, let it alone. I said, no, I've got a PowerPoint. He said, well, give it to the young man over there. He'll say, I said, I don't need to give him anyway. And I said, here's what I want to say. But before I say it, let me point to my power. My power does not look. And I went on from there on. The lady's name was Jane Fonda. Her husband was Ted Turner. And so Ted and I got into the movement. Then they introduced me to Al Gore. The next thing I knew, I'm with Captain Planet. And now taking that same energy and trying to bring it into the African-American, the Latino community. But it started on teenage pregnancy with Jane and all that. And we just celebrated the 30th year of the planet. So now, and I got involved, and then now working, and pastors all over now are looking at solar panels on their churches where they can save money and do the ministry. They're looking at alternative energies, but they're not only looking at it just from a climate point of view, but how do we do God's work? So it all connects when you begin to to open up and see what can happen when, as God says, he didn't give us the power of fear, but of a sound mind. And if you sit back and say, wow, I can't believe this, it's amazing. And then all of a sudden, so that's why everybody listening to me, your life is so amazing. Stop this afternoon when you get off this call with Pastor McCroy and say, wow, what have I done that's amazing? And you will be amazed.
Thank you. Thank you. We can't conclude it any better than that. I am amazed. Reflections on an awe-inspired life. It's a good read. You will be amazed. He's only scratched the surface of the stories that are in here.
Let me tell you, can I say something?
Yes.
Ben Campbell Johnson, his name is on there. He wrote it with me. He was really the brains pulling it out because I didn't know anything about putting all that. Now, Ben Campbell, Google him. Ben Campbell grew up over in Alabama. Mm-hmm. All of his uncles and his father, all of them were Ku Klux Klansmen. He never been around Christian, and particularly worse than you could deal with him was a Muslim because he grew up there, but he came out, went to Columbia, and before he died, and he and I used to sit and go back and forth around this, and he said, that's amazing. And I said, what, Ben? He said, I'm amazed at that. He was 87 when he died about 2 years ago, teaching at Columbia here in Atlanta. He'd gone to a lot of schools, and he started what you call immersions here in the city of Atlanta. You see, in order for you to grow, you've got to be eclectic in your nature. You've got to be interfaith, intercultural, and broaden out your period of sphere of influence. And Ben Campbell began to do that. And he was taking Muslims into Jewish synagogues, Jews into the prayers on Friday, Juma prayer. Then we were going to Hindu temples and call them immersions. So for 3 days, taking people from a completely different background into other areas. Then we founded World Pilgrims. And for 20 years, a group of us went to Israel, to Turkey, and every other night we changed roommates. And when you can kind of have some levity, some humor, I'll never forget our Imam Plim al-Amin. I say, oh, it's a Laki Lakey. He said, no, it's a Wa Alaikum Salam. I said, it's a Laki. What difference does it make? We just saying hello. And we would laugh, or he would say something. And it's not putting down another, but it's understanding. Don't be so ethnocentric and you're so holy that you cannot understand and appreciate the difference in another faith, another religion, another person, another gender. And then you begin to grow. And once you begin to grow, it's amazing.
It is indeed. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Dr. Durley, for sharing with us. Thank you for putting so much of your story in print. I hope we see a volume 2, because you've been involved in so much since you published this one. We need 2 parts. And to everyone out here listening to Your Liberation Library, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, we just want to close with a question for you. What's in your library?